Prairie Mosaic is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4, 2008, the North Dakota Council on the Arts, and by the members of Prairie Public.
Welcome to Prairie Mosaic, a patchwork of stories about the people and places that contribute to the arts, culture, and history in our region.
Hi, I'm Barb Gravel.
And I'm Bob Dambach. On this edition of Prairie Mosaic, we'll listen to a musical story about a woman's uncertain identity. Watch the artistic process of glassblowing and enjoy the smooth sounds of a local jazz quintet.
At the turn of the 20th century, Minnesota's entrenched Republican Party was challenged by the most successful radical third party in American history. From 1918 to 1944, the Farmer Labor Party was strong enough to wrest control of the state's government, away from the established political parties, forever transforming Minnesota's political climate.
The Midwest had a one-party system because so many of these states were brought into the Union as Republican states, and that initial development of their parties meant that it was hard for any kind of other competition to grow up. And the Democratic Party basically had its stronghold in New York City and in northeastern cities and in the South. And the rest of the country was a Republican stronghold. In a one-party system, voters, curiously, are not very loyal to the one party. There's something about competition that makes for partisan identification. And the lack of competition, of party competition, and the fact that the Republican Party didn't have to fight to build an electorate meant that a large number of voters really were ready there for being picked up by people who wanted to start protest organizations, because these people weren't particularly loyal to the Republican Party. States are laboratories of democracy. That is to say that one of the great things about American federalism is that you can have experiments, policy experiments, and political experiments, and organizational experiments. So there's a kind of dynamism and innovation that's built into American politics. And for me, that was really what was so fascinating about the Farmer Labor Party, was it showed the possibility for dynamism and innovation that American federalism makes possible. Farming is a very insecure business. So that insecurity was something that farmers in the 19th century and in the 20th century until the 1930s were hoping to politically fix somehow. Workers didn't have protections. They didn't have protections for hours, and more important, they couldn't organize. They would get stomped on if they organized. So farmers were insecure. Workers were insecure in terms of their organizational rights, or so it seemed to people, because they were distant from banks and from cities and from what seemed to be the centers of financial and economic power. So they seemed to be essentially at the mercy of other people making big decisions about their lives. That created a context that was very favorable in Minnesota. Between the strength of the socialist trade unions and suddenly the emergence and the setting up of shop in St. Paul of the Nonpartisan League, and then their organization out in the rural areas of Minnesota, the two basic kinds of economic insecurity created the potential for a coalition in the 1920s and the 1930s. If you were an aspiring politician, there were only two places you wanted to go. You wanted to become a Republican, or you wanted to become a farmer laborite. There was a very talented socialist trade unionist who's completely obscure today, but was actually very important in the development of the Farmer Labor Party, a guy named William Mahoney. He was a person who threw himself into this idea that we ought to have an organization that would function between elections to keep the discussion going about what they're all about, and to focus on how we're going to get good candidates to run for the different positions. Then in the 30s, it really takes off as a third party, and it's really the most successful state-level third party we've ever had. And it's, in that sense, a unique political organization. And that's a going concern until 1938, when Harold Stassen takes over all the reasonable sections of the platform and just says, if you get me, you'll get a reasonable Republican who just happens to believe everything the farmer laborites have stood for. But the party limped along. And then in 1944, decided that, yep, we're going to go and we'll move into the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party said, you come on over, we want you because we're trying to build ourselves. The Democratic Party is now the new party. It's the strong party. And we want to bootstrap ourselves into getting the kind of strength in the electorate that Democratic parties are getting everywhere else. The reason that we don't have state-level third parties like the Farmer Labor Party is that the New Deal was a big success, and it permanently strengthened the Democratic Party.
I recognize that the many proclamations from state capitals and from Washington, the legislation, the Treasury regulations, and so forth, couched for the most part in banking and legal terms, ought to be explained for the benefit of the average citizen.
All the prestige of doing good things in American politics moved over to the Democratic Party, and so it's just very hard to start a plausible third-party organization. The Minnesota Farmer Labor Party's success, failure, it fails because it's not around, right? So we don't have farmer labor politicians. Success, it's a success in the sense that it created a political tradition, and it's encoded in the name of the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. And to that extent, voters every election get reminded that they have a political tradition here in Minnesota that is right there on the ballot in front of them. It created politicians who were more open-minded, I think, about social policy, and certainly much more open to organized labor than Democratic Party politicians elsewhere in the country. Politicians who were heirs to the kind of progressivism that the Farmer Labor Party tried to institutionalize and make permanent.
Susan Brown was a mixed-blood Dakota Indian, and although she was surrounded by people who had an impact on politics in the mid and late 1800s, her own identity and story has been somewhat lost to history. Enjoy Elisa Corinne's musical adaptation of Brown's life in the song, Who Was I?
French-Canadian and Dakota Yankton. My mother's grandfather was the great Chief Red Wing. My husband was one of the men who built Minnesota, and my son was a hero in the Sioux Uprising. Joe met me when he was married to wife number 2. He nursed me back to health when I got shot. He moved in with me and had 7 children. It took him 15 years to tie the knot. They wrote about my husband, my father, my son, but then they were done. So who was I? Who was I? Who was I? Oh, tell me something about my life. Tell me something mattered in my life. Lived in a world where there was Indian and white. Do you know if I was both or neither? Lived in a world where families were mixed, where marriages sealed business interests. I lived in a time of confusion when 2 cultures fought for a hold. As white pioneers built new lives, and the Indians tried to save their own. They wrote about the wars, the treaties and guns, but then they were done. So who was I? saved myself by claiming Indian blood. You can learn my husband bought me a piano from New York. He had no chance to hear me play before he died. You can learn I was a woman of note years ago, and that I lived till I was 85. They wrote about my husband, my father, my son, but then they were done. Who was I? Woman, white mother. Who was I? Who was I? Oh, tell me something about my life. Oh, tell me something mattered in my life. Tell me something mattered in my life. Oh, tell me something mattered in my life. Tell me something mattered in my life.
John Offutt has worked for years developing his glassblowing skills to capture the shapes, the colors, and the light of the plains. His inspiration comes from gazing across the prairie. His interpretation is stunning works of art in the form of blown glass.
I get up fairly early in the morning and come out to the shop and light the studio on fire. It takes about an hour and a half for things to warm up. And during that time, I empty the ovens of the work I made the day before, pick out the colors. This is one of my favorite sounds. The glass rods have their own, kind of pre-visualize what I'm gonna make for the day, do all the make ready so that when my assistant shows up, we're ready to go. Then we'll start whatever the project is for the day. Go ahead, Dave, if it's ready. I started out in Fargo Public Schools, down at the Creative Arts Studio. Did a lot of clay down there. That little blob of glass is close to 2,000 degrees right now. That's where I found my love for the vessel form. The hotter the glass gets, the softer it becomes. When I transferred to Morehead State, they had glass as an elective. When I tried it, the process is so much more immediate. The feedback loop is so fast that it was just much more suited to my personality. I'm going to use the friction of the table, the torque on that pipe, to twist that color up a little bit. So I've worked up the primary color. The learning curve on blowing glass is very, very frustrating. Dave's heating up one of the accent colors. There's a lot of smashing that happens at the beginning. A lot of things fall off the stick and get stuck to the door, and there's very little success for the first couple of years of doing this. Most of the work that I do is decorative, and I'll call it art with a small a versus art with a big A. It's not about content and message and emotion. It's about being well crafted and functional. We use a lot of strange tools, leather punches and cordless drills. It depends on what you want to see. It's relating to the material. I have a lot of visual interest going on in that little button. So some of it can be engineering. Usually it's more reverse engineered. I want to see this piece. What are the steps that it's going to take me to get to here? We're going to start up now. Dave will take the pipe and pick up some white powder and heat.
When you start something new, there's a lot more communication as to what to do and when to do it.
Dave and I are the only skilled hands for a couple hundred miles. So there's the two of us. If there were 5 of us, the work would probably be larger and more complex. I'm really enamored with the landscapes. They continue to get more complex and bigger in scale. They're so representational, and they have some interest in the land, and there's some depth to the sky. That orange color is because it is so hot. Start to pick up that blue. Technically, they're very challenging, so they're fun for me to do for that reason. So there I've created the sky And they do have an emotive quality. People can look at them and recognize them and say, oh yes, this is a July day, or this is a spring morning. So there is some art in the more recent work. The bread and butter of the craft work that allows me to keep my skills up and keep my studio running, so that when I do want to turn my attention to sculpture or something more emotive, I have those skills, I have the facility to do that.
So on that scale, I've created all of the visual elements that are going to be in this piece.
Being able to think creatively.
So now I'll put another layer of clear glass over that.
Being able to make an aesthetic judgment.
I drip a little bit of that off of there.
Is that beautiful or is it not? Is that good or is it not? Is that quality? Do you want to fill your life with quality things?
So it's like a little landscape already.
Each step. Over the last 2 months, I've really been working on the land.
Start by moving it around with the table.
I think I have it down where I want it now, and I can accomplish what I want to see.
Finish shaping with just a small section of folded newspaper.
So I'm going to turn my attention to variations in the sky, variations in clouds.
It's going to go ahead, add a little pressure here, and the sky is going to get bigger.
4 times a year I'll make something that I like so much that I'll sign my last name to it. Most of my work is just signed John, and there's a few of my pieces that go out that are signed John Offit on the bottom.
Point it down and let it stretch a little bit of centrifugal force. Pull that out a little bit longer.
Would I like to be doing it in 10 years? I hope to be doing it in 10 years.
I'm good.
I hope to take on another apprentice.
Little puff.
Have more help so that I can accomplish what I want to see.
Stop.
This is what makes life worth living. Don't try and make a living at it. It's a crazy, crazy way to, it shouldn't be a profession. It should be something you love to do.
The Mary Marshall Quintet has a smooth, fresh jazz sound that is sure to please. Together with Russ Peterson and several other talented Fargo-Moorhead musicians, this group puts the spotlight on some new original music and a few old favorites.
I started my formal training when I was about 4, and that's when I started taking regular piano lessons. I used to play in my brother's jazz band. He didn't really want me to play, but you know, I was I guess the better of the choices that he had, so he had to have his little sister play with him.
If you know of an artist, a topic, or an organization in our region that you think would make for an interesting segment, please contact us at prairiemosaic@prairiepublic.org. I'm Barb Gravel.
And I'm Bob Danback. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Prairie Mosaic.
Prairie Mosaic is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008, the North Dakota Council on the Arts, and by the members of Prairie Public.